The sex-based trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is now, sex abuse trial rather, of Ghislaine Maxwell is now underway in federal court in New York. Prosecutors say Maxwell recruited and groomed underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring. She has denied any involvement. One of Epstein's accusers was on CBS Mornings earlier, and she talked about why she's proud that she came forward.
I think right now, I just want to focus on the positive of the fact that I didn't want to come forward, and I did come forward. The fact that I did come forward, and I am a strong woman, it's not, I don't want it to define me. But at the same time, it helps so many other women, so it's such a blessing to know that I did, speak my mind and my truth, that I got countless letters and emails. So I wanted to continue on helping other women.
So for more on this, I want to bring in Jessica Levinson. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Really moved by what I heard from that victim right there. And what I have noticed is that increasingly more victims are willing to come forward. As a certain amount of time has gone by now, and so we're actually hearing from others. Do you anticipate that we will see new accusers come forward willing to testify at this trial?
So, I don't know. So there's a lot of unknowns here in terms of witnesses and how many of the accusers will come forward. The reports are, I believe, that 4 of the alleged victims here will in fact testify. And I think you and I had the same reaction, which frankly might be the reaction that the jury has, which is this is incredibly powerful testimony. And so even having 4 accusers come forward, talk about what their experience was, talk about what happened to them, and talk about how Ghislaine Maxwell played a role in that can be incredibly powerful. Now, whether or not there'll be more, part of that depends on whether or not more people will be comfortable coming forward, whether or not in terms of the rules of evidence, they will be allowed to come forward and provide their testimony. But of course, this is now happening in a different world. This is a trial happening in a Me Too era where I think much more people are comfortable, even though it's difficult, coming forward to talk about their experiences.
So, Jessica, what exactly does the prosecution need to prove here, and how are they going to try and do that?
So obviously it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. There are 6 counts here, and they basically boil down to 3 different counts of enticing a minor to travel across state lines for illegal sex acts and actually bringing a minor across state lines to transport a minor for illegal sex acts, and then facilitating these illegal sex acts, and then conspiracy on top of all of those. So that's a lot of legal language. What do they need to prove in plain language? They need to prove that Ghislaine Maxwell was a key part of Epstein's, criminal enterprise that included sexual assault of minors, and that she helped to facilitate that she did specific things, not just that she had an awareness of what was allegedly going on, but in fact that she, for instance, helped find these underage girls, that she helped make appointments for apparently massages for the girls, that she knew that Jeffrey Epstein would later engage in sexual assault at the end of those massages. And there's allegations that she herself took part in some of the sex acts. So there's a lot of specifics here that the prosecution is going to need to prove in order to show guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. And of course, it's possible that she would be found guilty on some of the charges and not all of them.
So then what kind of defense would Maxwell's lawyers be trying to present? I mean, could there be an argument that, yes, she knew these girls, yes, she helped arrange travel or meetings, but she didn't know what the outcome was going to be?
Absolutely. I think we're going to absolutely see some of that. That yes, she met the girls, that she said, come be a masseuse, it will be high paid. But some of the defense that we're hearing both in and outside of the courtroom is that she herself may have been a victim, and or that she can't get a fair trial, that this is really a trial of Epstein by proxy, that she's not the one who engaged in this bad behavior. She's just the only one left, of course, who can be held accountable because he committed suicide almost exactly 2 years ago. We're also hearing that she's going to call a psychologist to the stand who's a specialist in so-called false memories. So it looks like some of her defense will be focusing on the age of these accusations. I believe all of the actions in this trial took place between 1994 and 2004. So I think part of the defense will be, frankly, kind of trying to undermine the credibility of the victims and say, this happened a really long time ago. Are you sure? Could your memories have changed since then? And that is a challenge in any old case. Memories fade, evidence is hard to find. So I think that will be one of the bigger thresholds for the prosecutors in this case.
So would the defense gain anything by putting Maxwell on the stand, Jessica? I mean, we've seen in just the last couple of weeks, two very different cases, obviously, but we've often heard lawyers like yourself say, the last thing I want to do is put a client on the stand because it's tricky. In the Rittenhouse case, it seemed to work in his favor. In the Ahmaud Arbery case, it did not. And there's a lot of other factors that go into those court decisions, but I'm just curious about, do you see a world where she would want to take the stand, Ghislaine Maxwell, and her lawyers would be for it or against it?
Absolutely. And I think the fact that we just talked about two different cases where obviously lots of differences in the Rittenhouse case and the case dealing with the murder of Mr. Arbery, but we show how risky it can be to put somebody on the stand. So when would she go on the stand? I suspect if she and her defense attorneys decide that she needs to, that they're going to look at how the case is going. They're going to try and take the temperature of the jury in the room as much as anyone can try and read a jury. And if she feels like she has to tell her side of the story, and that, like Rittenhouse, frankly, she will hold up well on cross-examination. But once you go on that witness stand, or once an attorney puts that client on the witness stand, you open them up to potentially to any kind of relevant line of questioning. And when it comes to Ghislaine Maxwell, there's a lot of information that we've heard over these years that is not particularly favorable to her. So I think probably saying it would be a Hail Mary might be too close, but I suspect she will not go on the stand if she feels the trial is going very well for her.
You mentioned that the Ghislaine Maxwell team of lawyers may be looking to poke holes in the alleged victims' memories here because there's been such a wide passage of time. Is that kind of the biggest challenge when you're talking about incidents that happened, 20, 30 years ago or whatever the case may be, that you have to convince the jury that these alleged victims can remember minor details when I would expect that most of this stuff happened in very private circumstances. Perhaps the only other witness would have been Jeffrey Epstein, who isn't around to sort of confirm that what the victims are saying are in fact factual. It seems to me that this passage of time is going to be a big challenge for the prosecution.
I think so. I think that is one of the key challenges for the prosecution. Absolutely, yes. And so when it comes to, a quote unquote older case, I think that the defense is going to say to the jury, what do you remember in terms of specifics, basically, of what happened to you 20 years ago? Are you sure that you know X, Y, and Z? And of course, this is not just a part of this particular trial. Again, any old trial, I think that this would be a threshold, a real hurdle for the prosecutors. Now, of course, what would be helpful for the prosecutors if there was evidence that's admissible where people talked about at that moment, not later in time, but at that moment, here's exactly what happened. Did it happen to you? If there's any record evidence of here's what happened at the time, not later created, that again could be admissible. And one of the things, again, is that the defense needs to be careful, I think, about trying to undermine the memories of these accusers too much, because if they do go on the stand, if the testimony is very powerful, if it really impacts the jury, then you don't want to be seen to come in and really aggressively attack them. You have to use a light touch to say, I'm obviously something happened to you, or obviously you believe something happened to you. Let's go beyond and try and look to make sure that we're certain of your memories. But it's a tightrope, and it is certainly something that for prosecutors, they don't want these cases to get too old, in part for the reasons that we've just talked about.
So, Jessica, before we let you go, maybe, I missed this in your breakdown, but it would strike me that, I know a lot of the attention is focused on the allegations of sex between Epstein and underage women, but just the point that you made earlier about transporting a minor across state lines, it would strike me that it would be hard. She could plausibly deny that she knew anything about what happened behind closed doors, but transporting a minor across state lines carries some pretty stiff penalties, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason that we're in federal court when it comes to this case. And because there are these allegations of enticing minors to travel in order to engage in illegal sex acts, and in fact, transporting minors in order to engage in illegal sex acts. So yes, we're talking about stiff penalties. If she is in fact found guilty on some or all of these charges, then she will not see the outside of a prison. And these are, obviously, there's different types of proof that you need to come forward to show that she not just knew that these girls were traveling, but that she was in fact the one reaching out and arranging for travel, and knew it's not just, of course, that you're arranging for a minor to travel, it's that you're arranging for a minor to travel to engage in an illegal sex act. And I think that's going to be the part, as we've been talking about, that will be harder for the prosecutor to prove, that she didn't simply have an awareness, that she knew exactly what was going to happen.
All right.
Yeah, Jessica, I just want to clarify. Sorry. Just transporting a minor across state lines is not, that I'm aware of, a crime. It's for the purposes of XYZ, whether it's to engage in a sex act or to do something else that's illegal. But simply transporting a minor across state lines, that's not illegal, right? Or it's not a federal crime.
Exactly. It's the for fill in the blank, in this case, to perform the criminal sex acts.
Yeah, that Mann Act, it's interesting about that, Jessica, as you know, it was used in the 1950s and 60s and 70s to, in sort of, there's a history there of using this law, this federal law, to go after mostly African Americans. But it's interesting that it's being used here because it is a real thing, but it was how it was applied during the Jim Crow era.
We could do an entire semester on how certain laws were applied in different eras for different purposes and how they're then later being used. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And that's exactly right. This was a law that, while appearing even-handed, was absolutely used to target African Americans. Separately, something we're going to be talking about maybe later this week, the Ku Klux Klan Act, now a post-Civil War federal law being used in a completely different situation to try to prosecute the January 7th insurrectionists. So we're seeing these old federal laws come up again. Vlad and Marie, I'm glad that you brought up, what these laws say and how they were previously used in completely different circumstances.
Yeah. Jessica Levinson, always great to have your brilliant analysis, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.